Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Well, it happened again. I finished recording an entire episode and went to click export. The whole thing crashed. It came back up. And a very particular portion of the recording was missing. Okay, so I sat there after hours of work. I was sort of more okay than ever with a total interruption, total inconvenience. I should have been pissed. In fact, I went on to X after that and was scrolling through, and someone wrote, "Just lost a bunch of work. So upset, need to take a walk." And I totally understood that. And I also totally did not need to take a walk. I went into the kitchen and proceeded with my day as though something extremely reasonable and positive had just happened to me. And the only thing I was waiting for was the explanation. And I already recorded an introduction to this episode, of course. Now I'm recording it after the channeling, which is after the discussion. I can't remember, but I think I said something in the previous introduction. It doesn't matter. But the point is, I think I'm catching on to something. It's because in that ability to remain calm, which I didn't even know I had that ability until it happened, right? Okay, so this is not a self-congratulatory introduction to episode 4. I don't know, maybe it should be. We should all be patting ourselves on our backs daily, by the way, for having gotten this far and awakening and doing all of this stuff. Because we don't have the payout, right? Not yet. Not from this experience of limitation. We're just going through a whole lot of limitation, and not everybody in the universe can do this. Humanity is a masterclass of limitation, basically. Okay, so here we are slogging along. And then something happens like this, and then you respond differently. And I think I even talk about this in the discussion after the fact. So they're deleted. I get up, I walk into the kitchen completely calm. I know I couldn't have done that years ago. And also, it was not under my conscious control. My emotional system did not respond in the way that I know that it used to, which means my energy is interacting differently with the energy of this scenario of limitation, basically. It's an expression of awakening. So I'm sitting in the kitchen or wherever I was, waiting for sort of this explanation. It doesn't really come. So I get busy with something else, or I just moved on, easier than ever. And then somewhere late last night, I started thinking about what exactly I had been doing or recording in that episode, and why the choruses portion in particular would keep disappearing. Now, in spiritual circles and woo circles, I think there's a pretty well-known experience that we all talk about electrical stuff going haywire. It's kind of a joke that when an energetically aware person gets anxious or nervous or something before a presentation, the laptop will crash, or something will often happen when there's a lot of energy or a lot of anxiety. People who are energetically connected seem to be more aware of their effect on other things and the effects of energy in the room, but also what is it specifically about technological and electrical devices having a hard time with psychic energy. And maybe there's people out there who talk about this. I haven't heard anything. So all I'm going to do is share something that I'm starting to realize through all of this. Electrical and technical devices are an expression of human beliefs. Those beliefs get basically put into these inventions based on where we were and what we were resonant with when we created them. They evolve in some ways as we evolve because our energy interacts with them. Now, what would happen if your energy jumped a little bit or cruised out ahead into a different resonance in the progression of this group consensus? We might say further in time, or out into a different distant corner of what our group consensus would one day reach. There might be a span of frequencies that you can move across that the technological device cannot. It is an invention. It is appended to a version of what was believed at the time it was created. So let's say your energy expands, shoots way out, and you create something out there at those edges. And then as you and your experience of that creation start to merge back in to the group consensus and the original version of that technological device, that device might have a hard time translating something whose energetic basis is coming from a different corner of the group consensus, a different area of the playing field of limitation. We might even say a less limited corner of the playing field. When I channeled the chorus for this episode, whichever version of the episode we're talking about that previously existed, that got lost into the ether, I was vaguely conscious that they were talking about something that was going to happen at a future point in time. But the way I was feeling it from them was that they and I were both resonant in that point in time. It's a really weird feeling, and I'm just coming to consciousness of it, and I'm not even sure how that works. So then I make a whole episode where I describe and discuss this after the fact. And then I shift. I feel myself shift at the end. I have a release. I start coming back into the room. I save it. I'm sitting there with it for a while. I'm reintegrating. And then as I'm reintegrating, it crashes and it comes back up with representations of many of the energetic frequencies that I crossed through in the creation of that episode. But it couldn't hold on to the furthest one, the choruses portion, the most vast perspective. And you could chalk all of this up to this is a software that just has bugs and this stuff just happens. True. 100% true from a five senses perspective and will forever be true from that perspective. But if you're an energetic person sitting here listening to this right now, I know you have had weird experiences with electronics. And maybe something that we all have been doing is coming to conscious recognition of the bouncing around that we are already doing across lifetimes or across different distances of this game board. And maybe as we move around and we come back, there are aspects of what has been invented in this timeline that cannot integrate those aspects. So, am I going to download and start using a different software that my audio engineer recommended? Probably. Because I'm a five senses human and that's a prudent thing to do. And I don't need to push against what the five senses believes. It's valid. And for better or worse, I am still appended to this point of limitation that we are all awakening from? And am I more conscious than ever of a feeling that I tend to get when I channel the chorus, or even sometimes when I'm talking, that feels out of place, out of body, different? I don't even have words for it yet. But I think I'm starting to become more and more conscious of what it is that I actually do. And I hope the same is true for you. In the first part of the episode, you'll hear directly from the chorus themselves, as long as they're willing to stick around in the audio. And then afterwards, we will discuss. Talk to you soon. Beloved lights of your world, you are venturing further and further into new unknowns. You are coming to greater understandings of what humanity is and has been, and will continue to explore and to grow in your relationship with other civilizations and other beings who have long been around you. We understand that for some of you, the notion of these energetic neighbors is still quite new. And perhaps you do not have a conscious recollection of having met or known them. Or perhaps what you do believe that you remember seems unkind or uncaring. The face value of these interactions that can be recalled by a five senses human at this juncture in your timeline is often very fractional indeed. There's so much more to each of these stories, which is why your curiosity will serve you well on the road ahead. In being curious and being allowing of the entities before you, you will much more rapidly come to a whole, a complete version of not only events themselves, but an understanding of motivation, reasons, constructs, histories that led them to take the actions that they have. Some actions, we believe, once known, may make a great deal of sense to you. Beloved ones, what happens after that? What happens after this phase of getting to know and remember, where you familiarize or re-familiarize yourself with many of the players in this game, where you understand where they come from and where you did too, why they are here and why you are too, and even begin to ascertain the many different perspectives on what will happen next. The road ahead is vast. Where will you take it? Deep within the human heart are many capacities that have long since been obscured. In some ways, this was chosen by you over the course of many eras in your history. In other ways, it has been intentionally obfuscated for the benefit of many others. looking at each fraction of this story will show you many different perspectives. And allowing for all of these different perspectives at once will show you a new vantage point over all the things that have come to pass. This means, beloved, an allowance of many perspectives that you perhaps do not prefer from this human vantage point, as well as the many that you will. The heart is the epicenter of allowance in the human form. It is the birthplace of creative power, the intersection with creation itself. Its resonance broadcasts many things to the universe, things that humanity uniquely can do. The heart can sing many songs, play many melodies out into the cosmos. But we believe that it will sing the most incredible songs when it is allowed to feel, when it is allowed to come to an understanding of all the perspectives. And in so doing, more clearly reverberate with the incredible tone unique unto creation of what your individual song will be. You are in our hearts, dear ones. Every aspect of everything that you have been in this extraordinary experience, because we love you infinitely. So before we head into the original version of this discussion, which I am keeping from whatever place in the universe I was when I made it and brought it back here, before we can go into that, I need to describe to you what the chorus had said in that message that got deleted, best I can remember. And to be honest, I can't totally remember that much. But I do know that they were talking about love. And they were talking about the difference in sensation between when you love someone and they go away versus when you are hopeful for that love, maybe sense that you're moving towards the possibility of it, but you haven't yet had a tangible experience of holding it, of embracing it, of seeing it. And they said, what's the difference between these two experiences? And I said, okay, let's abstract it out and let's just say there's a piece of fruit. They used a fruit analogy and they said, okay, what's the difference between looking forward to a piece of fruit when you don't yet have it and then enjoying the piece of fruit and it's so much better than you even thought it would be and it's incredible and delicious and then it's gone, it goes away. They said that there's a human tendency, a human aspects of our beliefs which causes us to turn around and revisit that experience in our mind's eye or just in our longing over and over and over again as a way to get back to that experience. And then they talked about how that distance to turn around and go back is actually a very different experience of distance between you and the objective of your longing than the distance of moving forward. And they suggested that if we consider that sense of open possibility that we had the first time around, and we continue to move into it even after we have quote unquote lost someone that we love, that what we might find is a vaster connectivity between us and those ones that spans distance and time and all sorts of separations that exist in our experience of the five senses world. Where basically they suggested that momentary separation, by their view, is just an interesting next step in the grand unfolding of your relationship in its totality. And so now we pick up with that point in time that is behind us now, but in some ways I think was ahead of us, where I begin the discussion after the original message from the chorus. And I think, as happens with them, you'll probably find ways that this discussion ties into what was lost and also what was recorded that you just heard. At first, I wasn't really sure about that fruit analogy. In the old days, I would have been like, did I hear that right? And nowadays, I know that I did because I wasn't thinking about it. I was just channeling. I was just letting it through. And the hardest things to let through are the ones that I don't prefer mentally. Like, oh, I bet we could come up with a better analogy than that. Or the things that don't make any sense to me. Like, why? Why are they choosing this? Kind of like we talked about last week with stepping into the unknown. The situations that are unknown, that are easiest to recognize, are the ones that are surrounded by known things. They're all fenced in neatly with known things, and then there's this squarely defined unknown thing. Oh, that's never happened. And it's typically recognized by many of us. But the unknown that the chorus is often addressing are the things inside of us that birth instantaneously in a present moment presence. So when I channel and the chorus comes through and they say something that feels very unknown to me, that unknown was birthed in that moment by my opening up to a totally new and different interpretation. It wasn't something that got squared off and defined and then, oh yeah, that's unknown to me. Because that's a mental process of evaluating known and unknown. And the chorus would suggest that in that case, the unknown is actually kind of known. It's a familiar unknown. It's one that's been defined and accepted by our belief systems. And typically that's not the gateway that we think it is to the next frontier, as the chorus alluded to today. Sometimes that's kind of like a red herring of limitation. It's the unknowns that pop up out of nowhere. Those are the ones that are in the present moment. And those are the ones that we simply face because we're in the present moment with it. So I didn't know about that fruit analogy. And as I let it through, despite thinking that I didn't know why they were choosing it and was this working the way they and I thought it should or could, or was this best? And, my mind fired up. And I kept channeling because somehow I have learned to hold both of these perspectives at once, not because I choose channeling over another perspective. So I kept going and I watched, now consciously aware, as all of these judgments of a fruit analogy came up Did you know you had those? I didn't know I had those. They're in there. The fruit analogy felt predatorial, slightly Victorian, a little bit patriarchal, a little bit gross because fruit is pretty fragile when you think about it. I mean, good organic fruit kind of like rots quickly. You know, it's like ripeness is like a moment's notice. Like a day or two of ripeness before fruit. I don't know. It's kind of fragile. You know what I mean? It's mostly hard and not ripe or rotting. It's a very small portion of its time that it's perfectly ripe and amazing, at least in my experience. Wouldn't it be cool if fruit everywhere just like stayed ripe? I don't know how to put it. Never quite crossed over into rotting. But then I guess we'd have just a lot of fruit everywhere, wouldn't we? Oh, abundance. It's amazing how quickly we run into a concept of abundance and then view it instantly as a source of challenges and problems. There'd be so much fruit. It would just keep growing and never rotting. We'd have to eat fruit all day long, right? That's where the mind goes. So, speaking of abundance, something that is abundant in the universe that has not been abundant here is directions. Oftentimes, we call the reality that we live in the three-dimensional reality. It has a lot to do with the way we view the potential of other dimensions, like a 2D being more flat, or a 4D or a 5D, incorporating other aspects of dimensionality of a being. Three-dimensional also has to do with kind of three directions, up, down, sideways. I mean, you can go diagonal, but that's kind of just a blend of up and sideways. So there is also a limitation in terms of directions by way of gravity, which we spoke about very lightly in season 1. Because here, traditionally, on Earth, humankind can really only walk along the ground. Now, we have invented things that have gotten us off the ground, but the human instrument itself cannot leap or jump or soar at the current juncture. Now, I think we're far enough along in awakening that we all view this as completely possible. We're not really sure how, but we have enough inventions that have sort of started to bridge the gap to this possibility of direct interaction with the universe. So it went from planes to jets to balloons to jetpacks. There are many things in our conscious remembered history and also in our unconscious history that point to the possibility of this perhaps being more of a direct relationship. However, for now, typically, humans can only move around on what might appear to be a flat plane. Now, on grander scales, we believe that that plane curves into a circle, but you get the gist. From my 5 senses perspective, based on how far I can see with my human eyes, the ground looks flat to me. So my sense of direction, speaking to me as an individual human, I can turn in a 360-degree circle in my environment and I can look in that many directions. But very rarely over the course of a day does a human look up or down as they are considering or evaluating different ways to go. Because if I'm walking through a parking lot and I'm calculating how best to get back to my car, one of the options that is not available to me is to look up and see how far high I could jump, or if I could jump around that light pole and land at my car. So direction in many ways is fundamentally limited by the way that we view ourselves and our reality. But figuratively, there are many limitations to our directions as well. We talked about this in terms of time and possibility a lot last season. In terms of how there are only so many options of ways to respond in our belief system complex. Now, to a human, you might say, what? Like, I can respond to something in a lot of different ways. But if you look at this in terms of like an infinite scale, let's say, and I come up to you and I say, hey, how's it going? According to our beliefs of communication, social custom, time, era, place, country, culture, etc. I could keep going. What will come up in us is a relatively finite set of ways that I can respond. I will probably respond to you in that language or a similar language, or even if it's a different language, it'll still probably be a physical, verbal squeak and whistle, as the chorus likes to call it. I will probably look at you with my two eyes into your two eyes. I will probably stand there in my human body the way you're standing there in your human body. Why? Because in our belief system complex, there have not been other options. There's not like 100 other bodies I can magically morph into when I respond to you. I can't levitate 8 feet in the air as part of my response. I can't move around you like a tornado as a response. Maybe I can try like children do when they run around you as they're saying hi, but you see what I mean. So if you look at the belief system complex as like a physical thing that we move around in, directionally speaking, there are 2 ways to look at it among an infinite variety. The first is we're moving all around the belief system complex. It's simply that the range of options that are given to us are practically redundant. So we feel like we can move around in a lot of different ways. We can respond however we want to respond. Maybe we're aware of some basic constraints, but we feel like our expressions here have been sort of open and free to do. Or you can look at it more from the chorus's perspective, which is in the great universe of infinite frequencies. We narrowed our resonance down to these frequencies of limitation. We agreed to be bound by these resonances as a group consensus. And therefore, the directions that we can go in terms of where we resonate have been constrained. And a reflection of this is a very finite set of ways that we interact with and perceive each other. As we are awakening, the first step in much of this is realizing that there's a possibility for something else. The chorus says that they are one of these rendezvous. They are one of these manifestations. We got so far in our awakening that we allowed one of us, me, to tap into these frequencies and to be able to share back some of this information within the belief system complex itself. Many of us are holding these simultaneous perspectives. We understand and resonate with the limited place that we are coming from, but we are also opening into broader ideas and possibilities, which means our sense of direction is going to also expand. Now, figuratively, this means that in any given situation, we may feel an ability to open up to new ways to respond. This means that new ideas might come into our minds, or also we may just feel a freedom to not respond in the ways that we always would have. This is common in early awakening for humankind, which is a recognition that a similar situation would have instigated very different emotional sensations earlier on the path. So maybe there's something in your life that always used to totally trigger you and get you very upset or depressed. And as you go forward in awakening, you realize you're not responding in the same way that you used to. Now, this goes counter to a mental idea of how response works. To us, responding is kind of part instinct, part evaluation. There are social protocols, there are things that we learned that are in there somewhere, and so now we utilize them, and that becomes partially instinctual. But then also, there's sort of like a choice that's made on top of that instinct. By many views, this process would be considered mental. Now, contrast that to the experience of awakening, where you are simply responding differently, meaning you are feeling differently in the situation itself. A human would practically not even consider that a response. It's just a thing that happened to us, right? We are so mentally removed from that process and those sensations in our body that they stand outside of what our classic definition of a response would have included, which is mental processing. So if I say you're responding differently, typically a human will think of that in terms of 5 senses action. Now, if you go to therapy and the therapist says, oh, you're responding differently, then maybe in that situation where we know we are more focused on the emotional sensations in our body, we would say, yeah, I feel differently about it. But we might not consider that to have been a conscious choice. Sometimes we say, I am not going to let this situation trigger me the way that it used to. And those are very interesting experiences of conscious awakening. But often we don't respond, we don't emotionally feel the way we used to, and then we realize that we didn't. Realize in a mental way after the fact. Okay, so how does this all relate to distance? So let's go back to gravity for a second. And just to review from the season 1 episode, the point I was making in that episode is that gravity, or our experience of what we call gravity, actually had a lot to do and does still have a lot to do with the agreements that we made as a group consensus. Our feeling sensation of gravity has to do with the obligations or responsibilities that we feel we have to the group itself. We can't stray too far outside of what all the other members of the group are allowed to do or prefer. Now, in this case, preference would be mentally based. There are certain things that are approvable, allowable, acceptable by our society in our view. This translates into an unconscious generation of constraints in our mental frameworks billions of times per second. And we feel that billions of times per second speed, often in a sensation that we would call being liked. We want to fit in. That sense of wanting to fit in, needing to fit in, wishing to fit in, wanting a friend, wanting a community, wanting someone here who understands us, could be construed as an understanding of the felt sense of our interpretation and generation of gravity. Now, for you science brains out there who are like, what? Yes, this is a completely energetic definition of the genesis of gravity. So, in science, we look at gravity as a force that exists, and it must be a force that is transferred around the universe by some sort of particle that's super, super tiny that we can't even see. That may be true. That may be a perfectly valid way of looking at a force that we call gravity through a 5 senses perspective, in which everything that we identified had to be somehow translated through these 5 senses, which is ostensibly translating it through a filter of limitation that prevented us from seeing the vaster aspects of our natures. So, of course, in science, most of the time stuff is out there and has nothing to do with us. Until enter quantum physics and some of the modern sciences in which we have begun to find concrete evidence for the effects of the observer, of us, the scientists, in the middle of the experiments, trying to understand the things. That is a snapshot, that is a preview, that is a window into starting to understand what we are and the effect that we cause in our environment and also in what we perceive. Now, very rapidly, this can start to deteriorate in a human perspective because the more we realize that we have an effect on the universe, the more the 5 senses will activate at this juncture in our awakening. There's only so much of our infinite natures that we can see at any point in time because we're still in some ways abiding by the limitations of linear time. We're breaking free of it, we're expanding beyond it, but it's a little bit of a transition. It's kind of a process. So if you stay in deep contemplation for a long time about, oh my gosh, how do we humans affect everything in our reality? It can start to feel more and more and more and more singular. So it comes back into the limitation. And this then starts to feel like the final judgment. I mean, in some ways, humans affect They're reality, end of story. Reality's an illusion. All of it is just what we create from ourselves, and it's just our perspective, and there's nothing out there other than this giant universal reflection of what we are. Okay, do you see how in some ways that started as a window into our infinite natures and then somehow turned back around and went back into limitation where, again, there's nothing else out there. There's nothing more for you here to understand. In fact, it's something to be afraid of. See, the fence line comes back up. See how subtle it is? So you were like, hey, wow, okay, I have a power here. I am influencing things here. I am creating things here. And then it's like, oh my God, it's the whole universe. And I am creating things. And now I'm afraid of it. And am I really so alone? And do you see? It can follow an arc that is like a boomerang. It shoots out, it goes a little too far, and the limitation brings it right back in. I've had many listeners have this moment when listening to the course. And they've said, I start to listen sometimes and then it just feels like it's all been an illusion. It's all been a big dream. That is the sensation of starting to expand into a vaster perspective and the balancing action of the beliefs of limitation, which are like, wait, don't go too far. And in that, they express things to be afraid of, things that we are powerless against, things to protect or prevent, and in some ways bring us back to a preference for what was already known, accepted, and believed. As I've encountered many different beings, I've had the same sensation. Each time I go into a new crowd and start to understand their perspective, I almost anticipate it now. At some point, there will be a, holy shit, I don't know anything. I am such a tiny piece of the universe. I don't even know how I got this job, right? Do you feel it? It's like, heading out into a new unknown, armed with curiosity, feeling very open. Things are very possible. Wow, learning a lot. Wow. How do I even integrate all of this? It feels overwhelming, you see? And then we come back. We've called this the kickback in some of our live Q&As, that there always tends to be a kickback from the beliefs of limitation, where it's like, you've gone too far. This is enough for today. And typically what that is indicating is that there is a need for integration. If we are expanding from this point of limitation and we're not just shooting off the game board, then this would be true, because our furthest self, our furthest, most expanded energetic self is out there taking in information. And there's this pass back all the way back to the most limited aspects of ourselves, which are still resonant here. So it's like firefighting movies from way back when, before fire trucks. They would have these buckets of water and they would set up a fire line, and we probably still do. And so someone at the front of the line or the back of the line fills up the bucket of water, and then you pass it forward to the fire. Okay, so in this case, the fires of limitation are still burning, illuminating our amazing expansion, any direction that we go to from here. There are times when we're going to be like, put that freaking fire out. I am so done with limitation. And I understand that. But typically, when you are feeling that way, it is because you are way out at the edge of the fire line. And you got to pass some water back to the five senses fire. It needs to be balanced. The elements of these things, the fire, the water, need to be in balance. And sometimes when we go out to the edges of ourselves and we have collected so much water, it is actually the weight of the water that is making us want to reject the five senses perspective, which is still back there illuminating our path. Gotta let it flow through all aspects of our being. It can't just be there out at the outskirts tipping us over. As we let that energy flow through all of us, back to the beginning, we might say, from a linear timeline, or to all aspects of our energetic being, we might say, as expansive beings of light, that integration reaffirms for us a balance between all of these parts, but also allows the energy to flow that much more fluidly and consciously across everything that we are. Okay, so touching back on gravity for a second to the science-minded person out there, this is why we are seeing and have been seeing differences in the experience or the expression of gravity elsewhere in the universe. Gravity is a resonance, just like anything else in the universe. It is not an external force, although it can be viewed as an external force that then is attracted or experienced by different resonances. It could also be looked at more purely as simply an expression of a resonance itself. There are some places where gravity behaves so differently because the beings there resonate so differently that you wouldn't even call it gravity. So it's kind of like, where do you draw the line between what is an expression of resonance and what is our hard and fast defined law of physics that we call gravity? It can be looked at either way. And there will be benefits as we go forward in awakening and looking at it different ways. So now, as we expand in our experience of awakening, and some of the Loctite aspects of the group consensus soften, there will be different experiences of gravity. Now, this may manifest in terms of known technologies that become proliferated, an experience of another civilization that manipulates or experiences gravity differently. It may come through in terms of individual spontaneous experiences as well, where suddenly gravity just sort of slips off of us. Because in those moments, we have expanded into a completely different understanding and allowance for what we are individually that sort of breaks us free for a moment of what the group consensus needed us to be constrained by. In fact, some individuals have already experienced this in something that we call astral travel. Now, astral travel is a giant bucket of experiences and perceptions because we haven't really had any other words for these things. When I first started out in the spiritual community, first of all, I had no idea what astral travel was. I'm still not totally sure if I am doing it because I have heard so many different descriptions of what astral travel is. Now, definition-wise, I've come across like the same definition from many people. But when I ask people to describe to me their experience of astral travel, what did it feel like? What happened in your body? What happened in your energy? Were you awake? Were you asleep? Were you in a trance? There seems to be as many different experiences as astral travel as there are people. Speaking as one who is learning to balance all the many different perspectives of the universe as opposed to collapsing down back into just one, I actually found this very comforting. I liked that there were so many different versions of astral travel because to me, it was a reflection of the awakening and the diversity that was being birthed among all of us. But it does leave kind of a bunch of questions about the mechanics of this thing and us things, and how is this working? So I think traditionally we would think of gravity and breaking free of gravity as sort of like an anti-gravity kind of thing, where you sort of push against gravity and you push against gravity strong enough that you neutralize its effects. But as we all know, there isn't a whole lot of pushing against in the energetic universe that functions well for very long, because you'll be energizing things to push against. So I guess in trying to understand astral travel, I was trying to understand a more energetically attractive understanding of how there could be different perceptions on gravity that we could attract or move into or expand into, and therefore experience its effects and its limitations on our directions in different ways. Of course, one of the questions that comes up very early on in astral travel is, were you actually in your body? Now, many of the experiences of astral travel that I have heard seem to happen in a quasi-dreamlike state or a relatively conscious state in which the person believes that they actually left their physical bodies. Now, this could be puzzling indeed, because the Course has made statements about how the further we go in expansion, the more those energies will trickle down all the way through our bodies, kind of all the way down the fire bucket line and outward into even these frequencies. So as I heard these stories of astral travel that people were having kind of not in their bodies, a question that came up for me was this a transition step where how people are breaking free of gravity right now is in this quasi-lucid, quasi-in-between body phase where you're more in your consciousness, but you're not totally in your physical body? Or was this actually directional? Meaning at some point, that's just going to be the way of things, that if you want to like break free of gravity, you sort of leave your meat suit, as people call it. You leave your five senses costume in the bed, and then you sort of lift up and fly around and go visit people on other planets or whatever it is you have on your to-do list that day. I think any of these perspectives is totally valid. I mean, this is all just an experiment. It's all a way of kind of experiencing the universe. But I do think it is an interesting way of tying into what the Chorus was pointing out today. Before the Chorus made the fruit analogy, however we all feel about the fruit analogy, they were starting to point out, basically, directionally speaking, when we feel like we have loved something and then lost it, there is a part of us that turns around and looks at what we had held, the memories that we are conscious of having held that thing. And we wonder how we can get that back. And as they pointed out today, there's another direction that you can look at to close that distance between you and the one that you love. You can look at it as a forward step. This is counterintuitive to most of our beliefs, quite intentionally. Because if we looked at losing someone as a forward step, we probably would have broken through the veil between life and death a really long time ago. Instead, that experience of loss is so complete and is so without question that basically there haven't been very many aspects of us that look forward. We typically just look back to almost reminisce and remind ourselves of what we lost as a way of trying to get back to what it was that we lost. So the Chorus is saying, well, beloveds, you are awakening. So now more directions are going to feel logical to you. They're going to make more sense. It's going to feel like maybe that's an equally valid option because you are expanding, and as such, you are expanding into choice. So you can look backwards as a way of trying to get close again to what you have lost, or you can look forwards and consider this sort of just another step in the amazing, expansive story of your relationship with that person or those people. Okay, so let's put all of these together then. Let's put them all together on the same line because we like lines. It's a great way to start. Let's say there's the distance between us and somebody we have lost, as we say, to death. And maybe there's the next one, which is us and the distance between somebody who perhaps has gotten moved over a great distance, maybe somewhere else in the galaxy. And then maybe a third example of distance is between us and whatever the heck leaves our body when we astral travel. You with me? Okay. 3 examples of our experience of distance: death, physical distance, spiritual astral distance. Okay. Now I'm going to throw a 4th one on the line just for extra credit. The distance between us and stuff up in the air that seems to have broken a law of gravity. So the 4th example is between us who obey the laws of gravity and then something that does not. 4 different kinds of distance. what do they have in common? And if part of you is trying to think about what I'm saying is like, whoa, wait, what were the four? I've never even thought of these at the same exact time. My brain is having a hard time. Exactly. That is exactly where we want the brain to be right now. We are having a conscious experience of its limitations, and we are moving into an energetic feeling sense of what clicks, what connects, and what feels known. So now I'm going to say a bunch of stuff, and I'm going to say it from an energetic standpoint. And I want you to feel what I'm saying. And then later on, you can go back and listen to this and think about it. But try, as I'm doing this, that as you're aware of your brain trying to think, try and just like feel it. Feel the brain churning, feel what I'm saying, feel what you're feeling, just feel all of it. Just expand attentively into everything that you are in this present moment. Every aspect of these four different kinds of distances is a result of beliefs that emanate a type of energy that creates a variation in the energetic perception of the connectivity between us and other parts of ourselves and others in the universe. As the connection varies, the resultant perception on the five senses wavelengths is a variation in our understanding of the gap, of the distance between us and them, or us and our other parts. As that energy is perceived by the mind-body instrument, whether through a visible interpretation of the physical distance itself or a mentally constructed image of the distance that must be crossed, beliefs of limitation are activated, which present a seeming understanding of that distance and all the difficulties that would arise or the impossibilities that are inherent in us that would prevent us from closing that gap. In each of these cases, therefore, the perception of the distance is an emanation from our resonance out into the universe, which interacts with other concepts and energies out there. It is also something that is evaluated and sustained by the group consensus itself. In each of these cases, were each of us or the individual to shift resonance slightly, all the illusion that is built into that concept of distance might change. There may be ways of seeing someone on the other side of the veil of death. There may be ways of rising up off the planet into three-dimensional space. And there may be ways of clarifying consciously the connection between the version of you that experienced astral travel and the version of you that is translated into these energies that we call the five senses reality. In the case of astral travel, for example, as you vibrate into a different frequency, your mind-body expression will change. Those changes may not be allowed to be perceivable by the group consensus. Therefore, as you reintegrate back into the group consensus and remember the experience of astral travel, certain details are translated into what the group consensus allows for at this juncture, at this moment in time. Therefore, it could be said that all of these experiences of distance are not so much a creation of beliefs as they are a resultant manifestation of the frequencies with which we resonate. As we shift in our resonance, even ever so slightly, the experiences of distance will also shift. If we begin by categorizing the types of distance from the five senses perspective, what we will often be led into is an analysis mentally by the mind of the ways that this type of distance functions and led away from the more whole understanding that it is our different types of resonances and shift in frequencies that create the experience of distance itself. You can either start by categorizing the output, or you can start by feeling the differences in the inputs. So, what energies might we be resonant with when we overcome the barrier of death, when we overcome the sensations of gravity, when we overcome the felt distance between us and the parts of us that astral travel, and all our experiences of physical distance that we have here in the course of a very, very predictable, regular, understandable 5 senses day. If emotion is energetic perception, a simpler way of saying how are we feeling the difference in these resonances and our shifts that overcome them might be by way of a felt emotional interpretation of the differences in these 4 scenarios. If we were to align that to a particular area in our bodies that maybe are the best interpreters of distance, one of the best instruments or felt sensation areas that we have is around our hearts. The human heart is the voyager, is the journeyer, is the navigator. It is the way by which we find our way across the infinite variety of frequencies in an infinite universe. There has been much in this reality that has been created and implemented in order to disconnect us from the pure perceptions of our hearts, because if we did, it might be a very, very effective way for us to navigate out of the perceived confines of the 5 senses world. Within our heart's sensations are the navigational coordinates to reach others on the other side of death. Within our hearts is the knowledge of the shortcuts, the synchronicities, and the serendipities that get us across physical distance even faster. And to not put too fine a point on it, our hearts are the source of stamina that allow us to physically run and move across distances faster. Our hearts are the honing beacons for all of these astral travel experiences. And through our heart's connections, we will more clearly embrace, recollect, and connect to the experiences that we have had while shifting into other frequencies, as we would say astrally, and shifting back. And, my dear friends, it is through the pure power of our hearts to expand beyond the limitations that we set for ourselves, and by way of continuing to love and allow for this group consensus, that we break free of all of those constraining beliefs about needing to be liked, and understand and reverberate with the possibility that there was no way that we ever couldn't be. And in that, we rise through a completely different experience of gravity than we have consciously known or remembered. Your heart understands everything I just said. And in many, many, many places in this universe, that's more than enough to fly, to roam, to find, and to reconnect. And one day, your mind will be able to explain to you everything that I just said and that you already knew. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found these messages to be helpful. May they accelerate you on your path wherever you'd like it to go. For more information on the books which correspond to these podcast seasons, our podcast, live events, or how to get in touch with us, visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.